Our first guest today is Marcus Fendt. Marcus is Managing Director and CSO at the Mobility House. My first question would be, Marcus, what were the core learnings and the core setbacks during your over a decade career in smart charging?
I can summarize it in 3 points. First, smart charging is actually just half the way. Our vision is based on vehicle to grid. And you just see the picture here. We have been always on the top. The phrase is realize value pools. Vehicle to grid, integrate the storage of the battery of the vehicles smart into the energy grid, supply storage, and allow to work with flexibilities. That's our vision. We made half the way already that we have smart charging as a standard, which would be the lower part of that picture, the middle part of that picture, minimize cost. But most of the business we do with e-mobility. So the pathway of having a vision and realizing it, and especially in an industry which is given, is much more complicated than we thought. But some ideas to change what we faced, having a vision, being a software company, developing a software stack on a smart controller was not possible 10 years ago. So we had to start with selling charging stations, supporting car manufacturers with installation, having nothing to do with our vision at the end, but it's important because that's the first connection point of the customer. So we thought the big OEM corporations, this is the solution. At the end, we learned we have to do it for ourselves. Forget about corporations. At the end, you have to do it for yourself and realize it, talk directly to customers, because the big legends are just too small. And also, one thing we learned is we thought, yeah, you can do all and everything from a cloud. And I think we will hear it later on from David as well. No, you need to have a local device because most of it is locally. You can blow a fuse locally and stuff like this. A big setback in our technology where we had to rework a lot of things. And also a very important point, and I hope Mark does address that later on, is standardization. We are still lacking so much standardization. We have a lot of work to do with charging stations. We do not speak a proper protocol, which you think it's not such a problem, but we get service calls from customer. Why isn't it working then? And we refer to our software. Now, this is not our software, it's a charging station. So the whole chain within a company is involved like this, from sales to product development to service. Things we learn on a daily basis, have to improve on a daily basis. So it's not just about smart charging to get that done right. This can technology guys do quite well and elaborate step by step, but it's also the whole ecosystem and environment you need from a customer perspective. And last but not least, you can derive everything to the team. First, kind of the team in the company, which we have such a great, ambitious team working on that vision for 10 years now, and quite a lot of people there, such a long time. But also our board and investors, and it's not always the big investors with the big names. They help you, but they are not always the most supportive one. Thomas experienced that in the past too. And last but not least, the customers. And I see Michael from VKW is there too. We need to get their feedback, their close work, how we can optimize it. A lot of other customers which helped us to improve our system continuously, to have the customer focus. So these 3 things, kind of vision to realize is much harder than you think. Disruption in an existing industry is not so easy and was quite a hassle, and will be still a hassle for the next couple of, hopefully just months. And team is key are my kind of lessons learned out of the last decade.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcus. You mentioned the complexity in the business, and I think the complexity is one of the core reasons why smart charging is such a big buzzword in the business, but it's still very blurry. And I would say from personal experience, the gap between what you see on the PowerPoint slides, what you see on the websites of the service providers for smart charging, and the reality is still there. So I was wondering, maybe as a little introduction on the topic, Marcus, after 10 years, you might have experience on how to explain the topic of smart charging to people that are not from the business, even maybe having a little look at your portfolio with the Mobility House. So could you try to do that for us and maybe for the people in the audience that are not yet as close to the topic as you are?
So how would I explain smart charging? It's first, we take care if you have a couple of cars, we don't blow your fuse, and we make sure that it is charged as green and cheap as possible. This from a mobility house, and as you said, from the portfolio, ask about the portfolio perspective, we specialize on fleets and condominiums or car parkings where you have several cars charged. So we are not like Simon in the private sector with PV integration and stuff like this. There we connect to others. Our clear focus is on lots of vehicles behind one grid connection to avoid costs in the beginning. As you have seen in my slide, we need to reduce cost, enable e-mobility rollout in the beginning, because otherwise we will get stuck pretty soon. Mobility has three pillars. One is our kind of everything you see on the website, content, supporting customers to get into the topic of charging. We are a reseller of several charging stations. We have our own technology, the charging and energy management Charge Pilot, which we develop for ourselves and sell within projects or via resellers. And we do all these V2G crazy projects where we already prepare for the business models of the future, which are not there yet because of regulation. Currently, you can't make money by charging smart, at least not in DACH. Netherlands is a little bit different, and Leonard will tell us later most probably, but you can just save cost. It will change within a couple of months, but that's the case how it is.
Right. Marcus, you just mentioned one interesting point, that's legislation and the role of a state, the role of politics in the further development and in the acceleration of smart charging, of the smart charging rollout. So what I learned in our briefing call is that we might be closer to what I thought, seeing the EU legislation pushing much more forward to make smart charging a reality and even make it mandatory for the local governments to basically implement mandatory smart charging logics into their national law. So what's your idea on that? How will that influence the next 5 years in smart charging, and what can we expect as an impact for the industry of that regulatory endeavors?
There are two drivers. One is, as you just said, Thomas, legislatory driver coming out of COP15, the Paris Agreement, translated into the European Green New Deal, where there are three main topics. It's electrification, it's efficiency, and it's digitalization. So kind of you can direct all those three to smart charging, because we get more electric cars. We need to charge them as efficient as possible, meaning with green energy and not extending the grid heavily. And this is just possible by digitalization. And this is translated into national plans, also the German plan. They all contain those words like intelligent charging, smart charging, control charging, V2G, integration of storage, sector coupling. These are all in these papers already. So legislation prepares that, and it's there. Right. And on the other side, it's a matter of facts which are appearing now more and more. We have 7% registration of vehicles with a plug last month. So we had 2% a year ago. So the more cars you have, and we see this with big the fleet project we have, you just need to have smart charging, because otherwise you can't do it. So that now the reality will force people to act. And first on your premises, second the DSO will come, I have a problem, and then kind of also the energy market will adapt.
Right. Marcus, isn't there a threat? Because I remember we had kind of the same idea for roaming when it was first very, very blurry described in the EU directive, and then we had the task, and I was in the middle of it, to transfer it to national right. The outcome from my point of view was complete chaos, because those terminologies in that context of ad hoc payment, direct payment, roaming, subscription-based payment, they were so unclear that the national execution of those laws was also completely different. That meant, I remember having a conversation in Denmark, where for them, direct payment was that you can buy a charging card at the local kiosk. So do you see also a threat or danger in that, in the fact that there is too much room for interpretation for the implementation of the law on the national level?
Actually, yes, and that's really poor, because the energy market is very fragmented. 900 DSOs in Germany, I think even 800 in Switzerland, which is not as big as Germany. So that deep fragmentation for sure will be an issue, because everybody talks in its own language. I hope that by having the car manufacturers always pushing into standardization, because otherwise they can't realize global products, that we will go faster in that commonized market. I hope it also for all the new industry players like us, or Siemens, Leonard, all those, because we need a big market to make money. And if we just have a market of Bavaria or Germany, it's complicated. Software solves a lot, but it's also a complexity. If I need to adapt to a French market design, to a Denmark market design, to an Austrian market design, I can do it easier with software. But if we have a European market, it would be a much bigger market to make business in. I see that threat. I think it will take another 5 years until these complicated energy market and players really align. I hope this happens. Let's see.
Right. Marcus, last question before we're going to introduce David as a second guest. You just very briefly mentioned, but I of course noticed that it's very hard to make money with smart charging, and there's no real business case still in it. So what's the deal with it? Why are you active in it? And when will it come to really make it a business? What are the most interesting business and let's say revenue streams?
We know that there's a business in it, because we see how others are doing that business, which will phase out of the market. Who is doing it today? It's coal-powered power plants. It's gas-fired power plants. Though they are in the flexibility markets, but we know the price points of them, and we know the price points of battery, and the price point of stationary batteries is quite good already. But of mobile batteries, which are sitting around 95% of the day, having a 75 kilowatt hour battery, you just need 10 kilowatt hours of it every day in average. So utilize these assets, which are not used at all in the energy market, will have the cheapest price point. By increasing renewables, the value of flexibility increases. And by having more vehicles in the grid, the value of control increases. So this is, you can calculate that already based on other industry players. So we know that the value will come. It's just a matter of how many cars you have to play in that market. Not enough yet. But this is just a matter of time, and I think it's obvious now. And we have already 3,000 batteries without wheels in the energy market. And I tell you, we earned in average the last 4 years now with those batteries per battery, €1,000.
Wow.
So you see the value is there, you can do it. It might be slightly less if you have wheels on it, but it's possible to do it.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcus. Let's welcome our second guest for today. This is David Badency from Gridix. I'm very happy to have him on board today. Hey, David, how are you doing?
Good, excellent. Thanks for invitation, the great introduction, and Marcus, great pitch and talk about smart charging and how you see the world in the future.
Perfect. Thank you, David. David, I was wondering, because I'm a little bit, let's say, blind on two eyes, because I have been working in the e-mobility industry also since about 12 years. So I'm not really sure what's happening left or right sometimes, but you are, because you're having different business verticals, and you gather experience also in other, let's say, smart energy sectors before entering e-mobility. So could you maybe share what are the big differences and what are the things that you realize when entering the e-mobility business first, and were really like wow effect comparing to other vertical sectors in your business?
Yeah. You said it totally right. So we are active in different verticals. So basically, we are providing technology and smart energy solutions to big companies in the energy market. It could be a utility, but it could also be an OEM, and really focus on creating value and to solve real problems, because sometimes it's very hard to find these kind of real problems in the energy markets, and then we kind of invent possible solutions for minor kind of problems. So we are, for instance, active in the home energy management sector. So we have a customer, for instance, Fissmann, that is really selling our solutions to integrate all the different assets, heat pumps, battery storage, PV systems for their customers in bundles. So we really started our company more in the, I would say, residential field. And I think when we entered in the mobility space and sector, I think the biggest difference was that in the other markets, you have really, I would say, big players, and kind of the whole market shares are clear. But I think there is no week in the mobility market where there is no new announcement of a charging stations or a new product. So it's the whole, I would say, path is not clear. What kind of products, what kind of protocols, what is the center station? And I think, and the next point is, I think a battery storage at home is not that emotional than a car. And I think that is really like the big difference between like the other sectors, that we have a car and a lot of people are relating to this kind of product. And I think that's kind of a beauty that we can really try to, I would say, so that we can maybe do from kilowatt hours, brand electricity more to range and kilometers. And I think that's the beauty of the smart charging sector.
Right. David, let's talk a little bit about the customers and their sorrows. When you face, for example, a big fleet customer and do the first installation, what are the biggest pains and gains you're experiencing when having the first talks, explaining your solution? Is it more about allowing more cars to charge, or is it more about basically leveling the peaks at a local level and dealing with the situation of the energy capacities on a local level?
I think it's kind of both. I think for us, it's always very important to make charging as cost efficient and easy as possible for our customers. So I think the problem our customers usually have, that they would have to extend their grid access point when they wanted to implement or to buy more cars. So I think it's both, to charge more cars at the same time, but also to lower peaks at certain times. So it's, I think, a combination of lowering CapEx cost to get charging infrastructure up and running, but also to really optimize operation and expenditure over time.
Right. So, David, can you share a little secret maybe from my personal experience? It's really, really hard to explain the core value proposition, you know, when you have talks with customer, when you try to convince customers. So is there any kind of hidden secret you would like to share on how you would do it if you're confronted with a big executive, you know, from a car manufacturer or a big fleet company?
Yeah, I think it's always depending on the buying center and who's your customer. But in case it's a big executive or a car manufacturer, at the end, I think it's for them important what kind of vision they have, what kind of products they want to provide in the future. They want to just sell cars, or they want to just really kind of providing solutions to their customers. And I think smart charging is like, for us in our terms, the link between cars and infrastructure and providing a solution to their customers, because electric cars, they're not stopping at the charging station. There needs to be an integration into other systems, into BV systems, into batteries, to really offer the best, I would say, economical calculation for their customer base. And I think, the secret, how to explain it, of course, there are customer groups where smart charging at the moment is not mandatory, not necessary. So I think it will be a hard fight and a hard argumentation to convince them to really buy a smart charging product. But I think a lot of customers, they have really the problem that their grid access power is not big enough, not large enough. So it's really about saving a tremendously amount of money at the first place and to really save money over time. And I think it's not only from an economical point of view, and I think, but also from a sustainable point of view. And I think to really translate the efficiency into euros, into CO2 savings, that's very important.
Right. David, I was wondering, now we talked about the direct customer, which is in your context normally, a B2B customer, but what about the real users, the end users that somehow have to intuitively use the solution, somehow click through a smartphone application or through any kind of front end? So which role will the user play in this whole smart charging game?
I think it's very important that users have the possibility to interact with this kind of systems. But I think what we learned in the past, that there are a lot of early adopters, like most of you are probably in the call today, but a lot of people that really don't care about how smart charging should work. They just buy like the target function of making something optimized. And I think the users, there will be heavy users, but also I would say the big part of other users, they won't interact as much as we think at the moment.
Right. David, would you say there will be certain user patterns, not from the EV driver perspective, but from a perspective that we now have a big variety out there in the charging market, starting somewhere at AC 3 kilowatt up to DC 350 kilowatts. So where does smart charging make most sense from your point of view? And are there different kind of product patterns or user patterns that we have to clearly distinguish to really understand the topic as a whole?
I would say smart charging is, I think, most relevant always to the places where you have a high capacity, high power regarding charging infrastructure. It could be 3 kilowatt, but it could also be 100 kilowatt multiplied by X charging stations. I think smart charging is relevant to all of these sectors. I think in the past we have seen more smart charging installations done in AC sites, but I think more and more smart charging will be, I think, relevant for DC. I think there will be some patterns on behavior of the fleet owners. So what kind of logics do we have to do smart charging for AC or for DC? What kind of site is it? Is it a private-owned logistic company? Is it a public car park? Is it, I don't know, the parking lot of a big SME? And I think that we will see more, I would say, standardized patterns, what kind of load management we are applying to these kind of systems or sites.
Right. It's now time to invite our third speaker, Dr. Mark Multin, or as I call him, Mr. ISO 15118. Welcome on board, Mark.
Thanks so much for the great introduction.
My first question is, what can we expect from ISO 1511820? When will it really come, and how fast we'll see an implementation of the standard?
Great questions. Well, for one point, smart charging is already introduced with the previous version of -2, which was published in 2014. But with -20, the main new features would be, as you said, vehicle to grid, so bi-directional power flow. And that is set definitely. New features are very likely also wireless charging, as well as ACD, where ACD stands for automatic connection device. And one of the use cases defined is charging buses via pantographs. And this is a use case primarily brought in by Siemens. But you can also think of a robotic arm, for example, charging, let's say, self-driving cars, or from a ground pad, a kind of a robotic arm, or let's say a robotic arm touching from the ground pad to a pad in the on the car, on the lower side of the car. So you have conductive charging. I'm not 100% sure we will see ACD and wireless charging in the final version. There are discussions because it's not yet really in a very mature state. The reason being, we are also depending on other standards. For example, for wireless charging in ISO 15118, we define the communication side, but there's also the hardware side, the geometries. And that is defined, I think it's 61980, the IEC standard. And it's hard to synchronize those two standards because we are still waiting for them to finalize. So we'll see.
Right.
However, bi-directional charging, vehicle to grid, that is definitely set. And regarding the current status, until the end of August, there was a commenting phase. We have right now an internal document, which we call a pre-FDIS, where FDIS stands for Final Draft International Standard. And the FDIS is usually a document that is a feature freeze. So once an FDIS is published, no more technical changes are allowed, only editorial changes. So right now we are in a pre-FDIS state, which means in September, we're going to start the discussion of all the consolidated comments, which will usually take a few months. And then I assume we're going to have a final draft by the beginning of next year. Not guaranteed, but ISO standardization takes its time.
Right.
That's the current time span. And then from FDIS to the final international standard, it can take a few more months. I would say roughly in the second half of 2021, we're going to have the standard finalized. However, if you want to start implementing that standard, you are on the safe side starting with the FDIS.
Interesting. Mark, what we say, we just talked about ISO, but of course, when you execute a smart charging solution, the direction of also the charging hardware, we are also dependent on standards like OCPP. I know that you're also one of the experts for OCPP. So which role does OCPP play, and what kind of features might still be missing, and where might be also some critical elements, seeing all those different versions and dialects of the protocol until today?
I mean, OCPP is the golden standard basically for backend communication between the charger and the backend system. Of course, we see some proprietary protocols like ChargePoint or Energy. I believe they have their own protocols and maybe some others, but this is, I would say, probably 95% of the market, if not more, is OCPP. There's also currently an IEC standardization initiative, which kicked off in early 2017, which is called IEC 63110, which is trying to internationally standardize what OCPP is actually doing. Their progress is not very fast as far as I know. I'm not actively participating in those calls, but as far as I know from the chatter, it might take until maybe even 2023 until that standard is finished. So OCPP in its newest version, which is right now 2.0.1, is the go-to solution, the most future-proof and the most secure version for backend communication, which we should use. You talked about different versions. So there is, I think the installation base we see so far is mainly OCPP 1.6. Also 1.5 stations still in the field. And a big difference between 1.6 and 2.0.1 is, for example, you have a native support for ISO 15118, which with native support, I mean, you have data structures in OCPP which are there to exactly transmit, for example, charging schedules, or to facilitate the installation of certificates, which we need for ISO 15118. Yeah, a few more aspects, but this is the main part. Plus, we have a very powerful tool which is called the device model, which is facilitating that the charging station can tell the backend all its features, all the components, physical components, but also communication controller components. And it makes it way easier for a backend system to gather all the information, all the capabilities of the charging infrastructure, and to set and monitor certain variables. So that is, I think, plus a bigger step towards security with TLS implemented, both server-side and client and server-side certificates enabled. I would say those are the three biggest new features of OCPP 2.0.1.
Right
now.
Mark, wouldn't it be quite tempting for all of us in the business to not always wait on standardization, and then, you know, the standardization bodies promise something and then it's getting 2 years later it's getting published? So wouldn't it be just quite easier and quite straightforward to come up with something ourselves and really use proprietary standards, be it open standards or really standards with an IP?
I mean, of course, you can feel tempted to do so, but one big advantage of standards is that you lower your investment costs. And this is one big aspect, for example, for, let's say, car manufacturers. We have, let's say, the big discussion in the States, ISO 15118 versus SEP, which is a Smart Energy Profile 2.0, which is now IEEE standard, I think. There are different interests, but the OEMs have a clear statement. They say, we don't want to implement different standards in our car. We want one standard because we ship our cars all across the world. So we want to lower our investment costs. This is the car side, but you can say it's the same for the charging manufacturers. The charging manufacturers are not really IT companies. They have to implement software, but it's not really their core business, I would say, from my experience in the field. So having them implement proprietary solutions and then also a standard, because you have to catch it with a standard, otherwise you're left behind in industry, it's not really helping with the investment costs. It is kind of tiresome to wait for standards, that's true, but in the end, it always pays off if you become a member of those standardization bodies, because then you can bring in your own ideas and try to shape it towards your business model. And I mean, that's also the beauty, but also, let's say, the disadvantage of standardization. You have so many actors from different industries and different countries, and of course you have to find some kind of agreement, middle ground, and this takes time. That's right. Just the way it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Talking about the different actors, you just mentioned the car manufacturers that are definitely the ones that pushed CCS. What would you say, when can we really expect both of the core functionalities of the ISO standard currently, meaning plug and charge, and also the first smart charging features being supported by CCS in the first place?
Well, CCS in its version 2.0, the specification 2.0 already supports 15.11.8, right? And I mean, but from October on, Porsche Taycan will be the first one to support 15.11.8 and plug and charge. They announced that, I believe, like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I know that Audi will follow probably a month or 2 months later. So those are the first ones that officially support it. I know that the Smart Electric Drive already showcased that, I think, was it last year at the Intercharge Network Conference, together with the EB controller and Bender and the Hubject's backend.
I think 2 years, or 3 years back already, even. Yeah.
Or 2 years back, yeah, okay. However, we didn't see it in the field yet for some reason. And I was talking to some OEMs and asked them, why actually is it taking so much time for you guys to bring the cars to market? And it has a lot to do with service level agreements and making the customer experience perfect. And I mean, it is a big challenge with standards being implemented correctly among not only car manufacturers, but especially also charging infrastructure. As I said, charging station manufacturers are not really the IT companies. So you implement the standard, and if you haven't been part of the standardization process, you tend to, for example, read the specification. You see, oh, this and this and this is optional, or this parameter is defined as optional. I'll leave it out, without reading actually the specification and seeing, oh, there's the concept of conditionally optional. So you can only leave that parameter out if a certain situation is happening. This leads to faulty implementations. Mm-hmm. And then you probably have to like hack around the existing implementations of existing charging infrastructure, which is a challenge, and it takes time. I'm not blaming the charging infrastructure. I mean, the car manufacturers are no better. The implementations are, I mean, standard is complex. It's huge specifications, and it takes time. And in the end, we have seen so many bad articles about charging infrastructure not being ready, not working. You don't want to have the same wave of bad articles about cars not being able to charge. I believe that's one of the major reasons why it takes so long. But also, I mean, electric mobility itself, you saw a big spark in, I think, like 2 years ago, I would say. We all said 2020 would be the huge e-mobility year. Then COVID happened. However, I believe this is really, with COVID, actually, it really accelerates the transition towards e-mobility, as we have all seen the effects of air quality, what happens if people are letting their cars stand still at home. And I think this was a big eye-opener. So although the standard itself was published in 2014, the industry itself was not ready yet for e-mobility. So I believe when 15.11.8-20 will come out next year, it will not take another 6 years.
How many electric cars do we need to really make it happen? Any opinions on that, Marcus and David?
David, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's a difference between V2G and smart charging, at least in my definition. So for me, smart charging is a first base dynamic load management, locally based, so to really lower peaks and to really optimize the local charging of EVs. And I think you also, answered the question totally right, Marcus. I think it makes sense at the commercial place, starting with 2 or 3 charging stations or cars. I think with the V2G, if we look at the future, I think if we really find a scalable solution, a business model, it should make, in my point of view, sense for just one car. But I think it's a question of business model and how expensive technology will be to really enable one side or one customer to be part of a flexibility market.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Marcus?
It's a matter of the regulation, as we had in the very beginning. Just to give you a feeling, today you have to bid into certain markets minimum a megawatt if you go to frequency control, which will also be in the future when we have less power plants with their immediate reaction to the energy market, then it will be more important, that product, and then you need also more megawatt into the market. So in the UK, you have products where you need 50 megawatts to the market. So you connect that to a 10 kilowatt connection in average, then you see how many vehicles you need to play in those energy markets. The regulation might change to smaller ones, but if you really want to offer something to the overall system, you need quite a lot of cars. I think it starts small. It starts vehicle at home, especially what David is doing. The systems, the solar systems are out of subsidy pretty soon. People would like to use their PV systems, optimize it with their consumption at their home, and they do it. And before they have money on the bank without any interest rate, they will start to just spend it on technology and vehicle to grid because they just like it. And then it subsequently evolves bigger into the market. Therefore, I totally agree with the poll. A bigger rollout of V2G, I don't think that we will see that before 2025 in at least in Germany. The UK is fast, the Netherlands is faster, Singapore, where we are at, they are really fast, but it's they have more in their hands and can control more there. It will evolve faster. California also.
Maybe one thing to add. I think it's not only regulation, because basically you could provide V2G products today, but it's not economical feasible so far, because technology is expensive, a lot of paperwork and so on, and you don't need like 50,000 cars to provide like 1 megawatt. You can just pool, for instance, 10 cars and to implement it in another pool. But I think at the end it's just like too many regulations, but not regulations that you can't participate in the market. It's more about like processes and maybe security standards, which are made or 10, 15, 20 years ago, which are not really, I think, status quo anymore.
Absolutely. So this is also for me regulation. The whole process you just described, David. We need smart meters. We need efficient protocols on a local level. Although things are not existing, at least in Germany, the Netherlands or Italy, they are quite advanced. Norway, complete digital processes. You can change your energy supplier digitally within a day. So based on those processes, you could start V2G much earlier and with less cars. But especially in Germany, we are not prepared for that at all.
Right. Guys, I always imagine the situation, because I guess we're all entrepreneurs here, and some of us founded our companies. So I always imagine the situation talking to investors and having those board meetings, and now finally telling them, well, it's going to happen maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. And then it's just starting. So the critical mass will then probably really come a little bit later. So how to overcome that as a startup company? I think that kind of discussions are quite normal in asset-heavy businesses like the energy business. So it's easy to explain for a DSO or TSO that already thinks in decades. But how to overcome this barrier when you have a burn rate and when you need cash, when you have to pay your employees? Is that easy, or how did you do it?
Yeah.
As I said in the beginning, you see, we as Mobility House, we have done a lot of things to survive, but always focus on our vision. So we started to resell hardware to our customers. Now we evolve them into smart charging, and which is the first step of V2G, unidirectional, aggregated, small aggregated charging. And then we will evolve, and the software is ready for that. We evolve into a bidirectional charging. It's not a one-step approach you can have, and you can't focus on one country. And therefore, that's what we did. Always focus on where can we grow already, gain customer and market traction, and then evolve those customers to where we all want to be from a visionary point of view.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think the vision is very important. And at the end, it's all about alignment between your employees, your colleagues, and investors. They truly need to believe in your vision in the market. But on the other hand, you need a clear kind of path and vision. What is like the first step, second step, and what are the unlocking, I would say, steps to maybe achieve 50% of your vision. And at the end, I think our investors, and probably also yours at Mobility House, they invested in our companies because they truly believe in the market and truly believe in impact. And otherwise, they would have invested in, I don't know, e-commerce startups and or something else. So it's a marathon. It's not a 100-meter sprint. And I think that's very important at bad times and bad days to really put that in front of your face and say, that's, if you want to really change something, it will be a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
I always follow the phrase, don't give up. And for example, we had not in our focus how important load management, so smart charging on a local level is, because our vision was always, we have been educated in the energy market. We always focused on the major value pools of the big market. And then suddenly we realized, wow, there is a totally different value pool. So once you are in a topic, you see complete new chances and opportunities when you say, okay, is this still aligned on the vision? Yeah, then let's do it. And at the end, we could combine that ideally. We had to kind of change our complete software stack, which was in a cloud in the beginning, to a local and cloud-based service. It took us 4 years, but now we have it, and then we didn't give up and found the right solution and evolved from there.
I'm very glad to introduce you to the first guest speaker today. This is Leonard. Leonard is a product manager at Greenflux. Leonard, what from your point of view is the biggest misconception in the industry when we talk about smart charging? So what are the things that people somehow think about in smart charging are completely misleading based on your experience from real projects?
I would say the biggest misconception is that we still need a lot of development and new standardization to be able to roll this out. Yes, it would definitely help if we have a mass adoption of OSPP 2.0. Yes, it would definitely help if there are mere standards on local level, how to communicate with a device like the Mobility House created through charge stations. But we can already apply smart charging on large scale. The functionalities that are there, the standards OSPP 1.6, they allow us to do smart charging on a large level. So I think that's the biggest misconception, that we have to wait for a future. We can do it right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if we turn that around, do you have some kind of core learnings or moments in your career working as a product manager in smart charging, which were kind of certain trigger points where you experienced, wow, this is changing something, or a core learning that changed the perception of smart charging for you that you have been experiencing over time in the last years that you want to share?
I think, well, it's not like there was a breakthrough technology. So we started already 8 years ago doing this via OSPP 1.5 with some extensions with some charge manufacturers, and that gradually improves. And OSPP 1.6 was a big change. I think the biggest insight that we have always been a little bit afraid of user acceptance, and we always assumed that users would be fine with it because theoretically they're parked a long time anyway. So why would they matter? But we did, a few years ago, we did the Electric Nation project, which involved 700 participants. So this was the first time we had statistical relevant user experiences. And the acceptance of smart charging was unbelievably high, much higher than we would have expected. And this was a project, so a lot went wrong. So I was personally responsible. I made an error, and 50 people didn't charge overnight. This happens in projects, and still the customer acceptance was, I think, don't know where hard exactly, but I think 70% of the participants rated it 8 or higher on how acceptable is this. And this was very, very good news, because if it would have been the other way around, I don't think it would have made sense to even have this session today.
Right.
If users don't accept it, then you're done.
Absolutely. Hey, Leonard, I guess in the Netherlands, you were one of the pioneering CPO to basically implement the first solutions over there. And we were always jealous, at least I was in Germany, that things are going much faster and are much more pragmatic and not so bureaucratic compared to Germany. Where do you see the biggest bottlenecks when you compare the markets you have been active in? So at least in Europe, are there big differences when implementing the solution, and what can you do to overcome them?
I'm always a bit jealous of the UK. I think
it's very rare, I would say, in recent times, if I may.
What I see in the Netherlands is that we have a tendency to indeed be very pragmatic, and that's good. So we move very fast. We do many smaller projects. There are many subsidies, but many of those projects are a little bit too small. So we have many almost experts, and they don't know exactly enough, because they didn't learn enough from these small projects, and that's confusing, because then when you want to move forward, there are hundreds of people who have an opinion. I think in Germany, you said it, so now I can say it. It's the other way around. There's a lot of bureaucracy. Nothing is allowed. So the whole industry comes together, and without having any practical experience, rules and laws are made up, which really hinder the implementation. And I think the UK is the perfect equilibrium between the two. They do experiment. They experiment with a few projects on a very large scale. Those projects have funding of £10 million. The regulators are actively involved, and once they have enough experience, then they turn it into legislation, and then they move very, very fast. So I think both Germany and the Netherlands could learn something from that. This is my experience. I don't know how it is in Italy or in Poland or in Hungary. So this is could be that I do not do right by other countries by saying it.
Simon, very, very glad to have you on board. Simon is the founder and CEO of B2Charge, German Eichrecht, German calibration law. What impact will it have actually on smart charging? Can we already know what impact it will have, or is it irrelevant for the implementation of smart charging solutions?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And I think I have to take care that my name is not too much connected to Eichrecht, because I think it's not the most preferred
can be good or bad.
Topic.
It can be good or bad.
Yeah,
someone has to solve it.
Yeah, okay. So, but I worked on the topic for multiple projects in the past, and I'm currently on the topic. And I think this is one part that is, of course, very important, because you want to invoice the customer correctly, and it's a very good thing that people now have to take care that the invoice is always correct, and that it can be proven. But connecting this with smart charging brings it to a much deeper level of integration of this Eichrecht to the charging station, and also a much deeper integration between CPO and MSP, because the one has the tariff, what might be flexible in the future in some kind. For example, you get cheaper prices if you allow for some flexibility, or you're not charged such high prices overnight, or similar things. But then on the other side, there's a real hardware in the field somewhere, and this is not so flexible, possibly, and it has to provide the data, the metering points, and they have to be signed and all that for this charging tariff and for this flexible solution. And we are not there yet. There's a lot to do on the technical side, and also a lot with regulations and all that. So the question is also, how do you price all that? For example, what is the tax for the kilowatt hour that you charge somewhere else and provide back into the grid on another place?
Mm-hmm. Simon, what would you say? Because we already experienced that impact of calibration law. My guess would be that it basically pulled us back. It freezed the market for 1 to 2 years. And now what I heard that there are ideas of our neighboring countries to also implement it. The same question here in the smart charging context. How can we even get that managed? Because we talked about, of course, standardization. Now we're talking about regulation. Do you have an idea how we can turn it into a very positive thing? Because the connotation of it is quite negative. Everyone agrees that it's way too early to have implemented it. So is there any kind of advice we can give to our Austrian friends? I heard that they are closest to basically copying some of the ideas also in the smart charging context.
Yeah, actually, I'm currently in Vienna. I could tell them right away. I think it's a good point to implement it. Of course, it would have been much too early to have this Eichrecht implementation and the requests from the government also to do it now much earlier. But waiting longer would also lead to much higher cost of implementing it. I think it is. You can never know if it's really the perfect moment, but I think it's not too early to implement it because there's a lot to adapt. And why should you wait for that if you know that you have to do it at some moment in time? And from my point of view, there are a lot of things what you can already think through and bring in, for example, into standards, that you already anticipate the future use cases and don't narrow down the standards to only what you know now, but to leave them open that you can adapt for future use cases like smart charging in the Eichrecht solution right now. And for example, this is exactly what we are doing currently in the SAFE group. We are defining standards and best practice examples for smart charging, for Eichrecht, and also consider smart charging use cases.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Simon. I think it's worth having another look at the questions from the audience now that we have all the participants and speakers on board. So the first one is to Marcus. Marcus, your controller is based in the Raspberry Pi, so a little PC, a little computer, as far as I understand it. However, within the automation industry standards, these are not approved. Do you have any comments on this, Marcus?
Actually, no, I'm not aware of that. I'm not into that technical details. I know quite a lot, but it's an industrial Raspberry Pi from Kunduz we use. And we have several kind of improvements from the NSOE or car manufacturers. But I get back to you on that, asking product management.
Mm-hmm. Marcus,
I would have a question to Simon on his last statement on the Eichrecht. For me, I have to say, not being into it at all because we don't do billing. We have partners for billing. This is not our competence, and it's a whole ecosystem for itself. But the Eichrecht for me is absolutely stupid how it's set up, because if I look to the telecom industry, you can do it digital, much cheaper and much better than we realized it in Germany. And especially what I'm missing, because currently we are talking about kilowatt hours unidirectional charged, mainly publicly. But what will happen in the future in our vision, vehicle to grid, smart charging, means you have not only kilowatt hour, but you have also kilowatt, so power, which needs to be built, and you have it in two directions. There needs to be, if we stay in that thinking that we need to meter Eichrechtskonform within the calibration law locally, non-digital, we have to change anyhow if we go bidirectional. So because everything which is established is not usable. So I think from my point of view, but not into the details there, we are on a stupid track, because it's not a digital modern track in my point of view. So interested in yours.
Yes, what is stupid about it? The law is, I don't know if you want to call the law stupid or the way we implement it at the moment. So I think these are two different things. I think the law wants only to do one thing. It wants to guarantee that the customer is billed for the right prices. And for the most customers, energy is something similar to something magical. They cannot see it, they cannot feel it. There's no way to meter it or to invoice it in another way than having a real trusted meter inside. And I think this is what the ITAD is about. Of course, it is a very old law, and it is focusing the use cases in the household. So it has never been adapted to these use cases we now see. Maybe it will be required to adapt the law itself, but actually it's quite broad, and the question is how you implement it. And of course, there are ways to do it better, and I think a lot of companies are working on it. And if you have to invoice later for the power instead of the energy, it is still possible under the same law. The question is how we implement it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you guys. I would say another look at what the viewers say and what they want to ask us. So how can we work together in the best possible way to push EV adoption and make the transition go even faster? This is from Michael Scholz, if I pronounce it correctly. Thank you, Michael. Anyone who wants to answer this question?
I don't know if I got the question right, but I guess it's all about buying EV cars at the end. So I think it kind of forces all the other parties then to make the right regulations to build up charging infrastructure. And I think the customers at the end have more power than they think. And it's the decision they can do, whether they take an EV car sharing program, or if they buy an EV, if they ask their companies if they have charging stations or if they want to build it up. So I think it's maybe the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any kind of leading? Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I think what is really, really super important to push forward for adoption of EVs is to guarantee a seamless user experience. Be it from the charging station is physically working up to a properly implemented protocol towards a helpline that is working perfectly, so that the user is not standing in the rain and then needs to desperately charge. So there are several factors we have to take into consideration. One of them being a interoperable charging solution. So the charging station and the backend are perfectly aligned with their implementation of the protocol. And this is often not the case yet. Mm-hmm. And Mark, roaming, of course. I mean, roaming is still an issue.
Mark, speaking of the interoperability with the charging station, I heard that you're working on something like a golden test device to make it easier to really test the implementation of OCPP. I found that really, really interesting, and experiencing the struggles myself in different projects for an implementation that should work for 10 years already on paper, but it's actually not. So could you tell us a little bit about that work of yours?
Yes, I mean, my work has the last couple of years since I launched V2G Clarity as a brand has always been to lower the barrier of complexity for all the companies that want to get into the market, mainly focusing on ISO 15118. I've done that the last 4 years, mainly for the car manufacturers, charging station manufacturers, and so on. But I see the adoption is just really slow still. And I think one more way we at V2G Clarity with my team now can help is to provide a test system, a compliance testing device for charging station manufacturers implementing OCPP 2.0.1, and also for those CSMS providers, where CSMS stands for Charging Station Management System, or back office. And our approach is to have a cloud-based system, a testing as a service, where you can choose, do I want to test my charging station or do I want to test my back office system? And then we simulate the counterpart based on all the test cases that are currently defined by the Open Charge Alliance. There is a compliance working group currently in place that defines all the test cases. And right now, as the test cases come out, we are implementing all the test cases. And we plan to have this tool ready by the end of this year, starting in December. There's going to be an announcement next week that we already partnered up with Comemso. Compliance test for ISO 15, and we have then a completely integrated solution, basically. And this is a huge service, I hope, to advance the acceleration towards really future-proof solutions. We don't cater for OCP 1.6, sorry. I really want to focus on a more advanced technology that is really enabling all the use cases we need for smart charging, for V2G, secure charging, and that's basically what we plan for. We also I'm gonna pitch the idea next week at the Intercharge Network conference. And stay tuned, you will hear more. And one aspect, we are very focused on a user-centric approach. So we do conduct a lot of user interviews to get feedback on our, first of all, on the features. We did that in July already, but now the UX and the UI is already finished. And we are seeking people who are interested in using the solution later on and giving us feedback on the UI. So if you're interested, drop me a line.
Thank you, Mark.
Saying something very important, because if the people buy the EVs, everything else has to work properly in the ecosystem. And we need, and I really honor ELAT or the Dutch approach since years and Mark's work. We need now the standards. We need to work closely together, not focusing too early on competition, rather work together to build up a market for all of us. And then we need to convince all the players, charging station manufacturers, to be, as we learned, more on the software side and not only on the hardware side, because especially if we come to 2.0 and upwards, it's a lot about software, and that has to be implemented properly, and test cases are key. We run several thousands of test cases, edge cases, and see the complexity in there. And if it's not working, customers are complained, your service gets overloaded, you pay people just to calm down customers. This can't be a future. We need to get a standardized, smooth future as soon as possible within that industry.
Thank you.
There's one thing I'd like to add to that, because I agree with everything said, but many of you already mentioned the customer acceptance. And this is what we learned, that already mentioned, that the smart charging is very acceptable to end users. But there are two things that are very, very important that we experience. We need to let people know what's going on, because if they know smart charging is going on, but they don't know what it's doing, then everything that goes wrong, they blame on smart charging. Also, if they use an invalid token or they didn't plug the cable in correctly, so they blame smart charging. So you need to let them know what's going on, and you need to provide EV drivers with the option to interfere with this. For instance, saying, well, today I'm in a hurry, please prioritize me. What we see is that with Greenfield, we now provide that with an app. However, this will only work if these charge stations are connected to our platform and they use our app. And we would really like users from other service providers to also interact with us. And I think this is also a crucial part, that we have the communication between service providers and charge point operators, and also standardize that. We have that within the Open Charge Point Interface protocol, or if you do it via Hubject, the Open Intercharge protocol. But neither of those contain at the moment information on smart charging. Mm-hmm. Basically, we need the user to interact with the charge station, and quite often the user is managed by another party than the party that manages the charge station. So I would put that into the mix, what we need for EV adoption, and especially for smart charging adoption.
But Leonard, is it how far is this away? We briefly discussed about the smart charging in the roaming context. So you have a customer from a third-party mobility service provider at your station. So how far is that integration of smart charging in the roaming context away from reality?
Well, in my opinion, I think that the charge point operator is always in control of what's going on with smart charging, because they own the assets, they are responsible, they will get the complaints if something goes wrong, and quite often they also buy the energy, so they can do that optimization, and they know all the information about the site. So this is just my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong towards the future, but I don't think a service provider, so in the roaming future, a third party will not tell the operator how to charge the car. There might be use cases where this is not true, but I think in general this is the case. Although I do think it's crucial that a third party may give input to the operator. For instance, on, well, this specific user, you might not know him, but I know this user very well, and he has a battery pack that's so full, or he's in a hurry, or it's snapstreak. And of course, all this will get better when we have a full adoption of 15.11.8. But that's, well, Mark, you explained it very well. The standard is in FDIS format beginning of next year. There are some cars adopting it, but until all charge stations and all cars have fully adopted it, I think it will be at least 5 and probably a little bit more years towards the future. And I don't think we should wait that long. So how far is it? We are experimenting with it. We, of course, have the benefit that we are a Dutch organization, and OCPI is governed also by a Dutch organization, so we have good influence there. So we are doing projects to improve it, but it's not there yet.
I think there are multiple ways for connecting, and you said there are maybe other partners to parties who give input to the CPO. I think there will be multiple connections in all the different directions from the CPO as the one controlling the charge point, of course, but yes, also the MSP who knows the user best and other parties who knows the network best and so on will give input, and then there's a direct connection to the car, and there might be a UI in the car where you maybe also can control things about your car. So there is not the one solution from my point of view.
Right.
No, I agree. Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. I would say we closed the round, taking another look into the glass bowl, but not in general about the smart charging business. But I would be curious. We already heard from Mark about his plans with an OCPP test device. So what is to be expected from your companies in the next 2 years? So maybe as a final statement to know where you're heading in the next 2 years. Who wants to start? Or no plans? Everything already finalized.
I think
I can also talk on other plans. Okay.
Mark, please, yes.
Well, okay. Aside from this testing as a service, I very much like the idea of implementing, let's say, kind of an operating system for charging stations, making available ISO 15118, the complete suite, as an open source project. I already, provided RIC2G. Some may know it, some not. It implementation of 15.11.8-2, which came out in 2014. But to tap the full potential, I would really like to have this open source framework where each 15.11.8 version is implemented. -2, -20, also lower level communication with a -3. I've been thinking about, because I want to keep it open source, to make the technology available for everyone. However, it's cost intensive to implement this and time consuming. So I've been thinking about probably launching a crowdfunding campaign. It'll be interesting how that pans out, because crowdfunding is usually more B2C and less B2B. But I very much like the idea, and you will probably hear more in probably October.
Cool.
And of implementing CSMS of our own to have a fully integrated solution. And I think the market is big enough for several partners, and it's still a very collaborative market. And I like that a lot.
Very cool. Thank you, Mark. David, what's the plan with Critics?
Yeah, for us, I think, so we are not just focused on smart charging, but I think for us is to bridge kind of smart charging with PV system, other DERs in the market, also focusing more on the residential customer, because there will be a lot of, EV adoption and charging adoption in the future as well. So charge at home, charge at work will be big topics, then expansion. And I think I fully agree on what Marcus said is all about working together, forming a market, and see how we can integrate in other systems, because we won't do everything by our own. So I think it's all about partnering, to form a market, to form a strong alliance, to really put our thoughts into Berlin's heads, the people working at the governments and regulation offices. I think, it's a lot of expansion and product development.
Marcus, Mobility House, what do we see in the next 2 years?
We have 3 objectives. The first one is we have to cope with the growth. We have so many fleets kind of implementing the first charging station with them. Everything starts small. They have just 10, 30 charging stations, but they will grow subsequently. We need to build up the organization behind it, from sales all the way to service. The technology needs to be continuously upgradable remotely with all the challenges we learned also. We hopefully cope with it in the future with the things Mark said. Second is we need to evolve the technology to be able to play in all the energy markets, and to connect to more and more players in a B2B environment. And third is especially lobbying, explaining the value of smart charging, because I've just been in Berlin yesterday and spoke to Hildegard Müller the day before, before the Autogipfel, and explained the value, the CO2 reduction we achieve with smart charging. This hardly anybody understands on a political level, and the grid extension overall in Germany we can avoid. So this education part still plays a large role for the upcoming future, that we really see the according change in legislation, at least in the DACH markets.
Thank you, Marcus. Simon, what's ahead of B2 Charge?
Yeah, I think B2 Charge is still quite new. We just started beginning of the year, so there's a lot of things ahead of us, especially forming the solution where it should go to in the future. At the moment, we are building up the database. We have a lot of products on the website listed to get the B2B customer the access to the market and find the right solutions. We are mainly also focusing on adding more and more information to it, that people can easily understand the more complex concepts, for example, smart charging. And there I see that smart charging is one buzzword, but there are so many details. And if you want to find the right solution for your use case, it's pretty hard. And even for me, as being in the industry for 10 years or something, still hard to understand the different solutions. So all companies have to get better in explaining, and this is also kind of standardization in wording. What is what can you use, what can you do with it, and how does it connect to other solutions?
Right. Thank you, Simon. Leonard, last but not least, what's to expect from Greenflex?
Yes, so primarily growth. So we are not a charge point operator ourselves, but we provide a cloud platform with which our customers can operate charge station or be a service provider. And we see a lot of growth in our existing customers, see a lot of new customers coming in. So we're thinking the next few years we go from several 10,000 charge stations to 100,000 and quickly to millions. So that just requires adding services, improving billing, improving roaming, improving charge station asset management, etc. But specifically to smart charging, it's going to be an exciting 2 years because many of our customers are utilities. So we have several energy utilities that now have a network of several thousand charge stations. And several thousand charge stations is sufficient to start making money on energy markets. This has always been our vision, but it doesn't make sense to do that with only a few cars. And we've now finally reached the point where we can do that with thousands of cars at the same time. And this is just starting up with several customers simultaneously. And this is, well, for the company, but also for me personally, this is why I entered the EV market, because this has always been my vision that this is how we basically roll out the red carpet for renewable energy by absorbing it with electric vehicles. So that's what we will do on smart charging in the next 2 years.
Thank you very much for today, also for the audience. It was great to have you here. Hope to see you back next week together with Paul for the Digital Fleet Strategy webcast. And until I wish you a nice week and hope to catch up soon with you guys. Thank you.